Good morning, everybody. Namaskar, Vannakam, Sat Sri Akal, Jai Hind, and welcome to all of you for the second day of our national conference. Good to see you all. And today we have two sessions. The first one is on youth and women participation in electoral politics in preparation for the general elections 2024. And the second one is election campaigns, digital technology and social media mobilization in India. And then we have the concluding session subsequently, which will be chaired by Professor Shastri, the chairperson, the chairman of ADR. And in that we have our state partners, some of them who will be giving their views. So without much ado, we'll start with the first session of today, youth and women participation in electoral politics in preparation for general elections 24. And I will request the chairperson, Dr. Kiran Chokar, to kindly come onto the stage, and the esteemed panelists also, Dr. Chaitra Redkar, Dr. Sonia Bhaidas Nagarle, Ms. Angelica Aribam, and Professor Sridhar Pabisetti. So a brief word about Dr. Kiran Chokar. She is the trustee of ADR, and she's a cultural geographer with PhD from Louisiana State University, and she's done her BA and MA from Aligarh Muslim University. And she heads the higher education program at the Center for Environment Education. She's also a founder member of Mahila Swaraj Abhiyan. This is a network of organizations in Gujarat. So with that brief introduction of the chairperson, ma'am, I hand it over to you now to conduct the proceedings for this session. Thank you.
Good morning, and it's wonderful to have such a distinguished panel of speakers here. And as you can see, women outnumber men here. So we are going to talk about women and what's been happening in this country for a long time. With 50% women, there are hardly 14% women representatives in the Lok Sabha, and that's really quite shameful when we compare with our neighbors like Bangladesh, who have 21%, and places like Rwanda in Africa have 64% women lawmakers. And and this is when women's participation, which had been lagging behind men's participation in voting, that gap has been closing. And for the first time in 2019 elections, there were more women percentage of women who voted than the percentage of men. And so it's really time that the Women's Reservation Bill is again activated, which has been now dead since for the past 1 decade or so. So right now and of course it's also time. This morning I was talking to Malti ji, and she, the way she put it, she said that, we all realize it's high time that we also get the youth involved in the electoral process. And as yesterday it was said that about of all the millions of youth who turn 18 every year, only about 70% don't even register for voting, and of those who do, only about 10% go and vote. And so this morning I was talking to Malti ji, and she said that it is really important to bring the youth into the electoral process if we want to change mindsets, and if we don't want them to become a part of the system that currently exists. So I won't say any more, and I will now request our panelists. So I will start with Dr. Chaitali Redkar, who is an associate professor and a professor of humanities and social sciences. And she's the deputy chair and associate dean at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research. And she, before she joined here, she was at the SNDT Women's University, and she's a trained political scientist. So, Dr. Chaitra Redkar.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me in this panel. So that's what I was told, 10 to 12 minutes. And that's the reason I think I wanted to have a PowerPoint presentation to keep it structured. There would be a couple of other issues I'm sure would be discussed. So if I miss them out, doesn't mean that I don't think about those issues as important, but just to keep it structured, there is some argument which I would like to place before the audience. And so what I will be speaking is based on the experience from Maharashtra. Doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about what's happening in other Indian states, but I would want to take the case of Maharashtra for a specific reason. Could you? Okay. You can move to the next slide because this is anyway a title slide. And yeah, so it doesn't really, there was some data about sex ratio and all these things, again, not significant to the argument that I'm making, but generally as a point of reference, there are a couple of figures which I wanted to share. So the point is that why I chose the case of Maharashtra. Maharashtra, as all of you know, and generally whenever we talk about Renaissance or whatever modernity and whatever social reforms that happened in India, generally the two states or the two presidencies that are referred to are Bengal and Maharashtra. So Maharashtra has a very long tradition of social reform, which also implied that women's issues were discussed here for more than centuries. What we also get to see is that women were in public sphere for a very large number of years as compared to a couple of other Indian states. Despite this, what we get to see that women's participation in electoral politics, the percentage, whether in Lok Sabha, the women that are sent by Maharashtra to Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, or the women elected in the legislative assemblies, is no different than the states where social reform possibly came little late, or with the constitutional measures, women got certain rights. So the problem that I am addressing today is that why is it the case that in a state like Maharashtra, where women have a very large amount of presence in public life, for more than a century, what we get to see is that they are in very large numbers in socio-political movements. Despite that, their percentage, as you can see, is not very different than what we get to see in other Indian states. Little ahead maybe of some certain states, but not very dramatically different or drastic difference we get to see. So this is, again, an interesting figure which I found, is that if we get to see the number of women who contested election is comparatively more than the number of women who get elected. In 2019 or 2014, if we get to see, there were 277 women who contested elections. for legislative assemblies. But the women who got elected, the number is very small, again 24 in 2014 and 19. So the second question that I ask today is, who are the women who get party nominations and who are the women who get elected? And what we get to say again, the picture is not very different than what we get to see elsewhere. And because I'm talking about women, we would say that it's basically the father-daughter duo in Maharashtra politics. But elsewhere, even if it's not a daughter, generally we know that it is the candidates from political families who get candidature. And that brings us to the real question of women's political participation. Because if you see, and what I was referring to, something which I've been mentioning is the presence of women in non-party democratic politics in Maharashtra. As I said, we have a very long tradition of women's participation. The autonomous women's movement of 1970s, and there are a couple of very important women's organizations which are still present and active in Maharashtra. There are very prominent women activists who are respected across ideological line and across party lines. The second bullet point in this slide has named certain social movements, and these are the social movements which are led by women, or these are the social movements where women have very, very prominent presence. So the point here is that it's not the case that women are not in politics. Women are very much there. They are playing very crucial role, but they are part of the non-party democratic politics. And they are not part of the electoral politics. So what is the problem? What is the hurdle that something that in political science language we call as the function of interest articulation? So for the sake of interest articulation, women are there in large number, but when it comes to interest aggregation, which the political parties are supposed to do, there we don't get to see women, where also the basic question is they become lawmakers, they become policymakers, and they are in power position. So what is the problem? What is the hurdle? What blocks them? I'll skip this, though I wanted to discuss Mrinaltai's case, because this is one exception where we get to see somebody who tried to bridge the gap. But the question that I asked, the next slide. So these are basically, my presentation is surrounded around these four very important issues when we are talking about the non-party democratic politics, or the politics of social movements, and the electoral politics or the party politics. And this, in case of Maharashtra, I'm talking specifically in case of women's movement, but we can certainly extend this argument to understand broadly any kind of non-party democratic politics, which, if we decide to extend, which would include activities like the one that ADR is taking up. So we are not part of the electoral politics, but we are making some very important assertions about the nature of democratic politics itself. So the issue is that why is it the case that that bridge never gets, that gap never gets bridged? No, one of the very significant issue is also about the way the non-party democratic politics perceives its own role. And what we get to see is that whatever number of women that were present in this non-party democratic politics, whatever names that I have mentioned, they have very categorically mentioned at certain point of time in their careers that they are apolitical. They don't want to be part of electoral politics. The issue also came in this way that the politics of protest, the politics which interrogate state, is on the one side, and when you become part of the electoral politics or you become part of the party politics, in a way you become part of the state. So something which was going on very parallel to state, interrogating the state or protesting against the policies of state, how do we bridge this gap that comes from the in the very approach towards politics? And I came across one very interesting article written when the 33% reservation for women was introduced in Maharashtra, which was even before it was implemented at the national level. And one very interesting argument which came from activists from social movement was that we have so far been interrogating the state, we have so far been questioning the state, and now if we want to become part of the state, we are not equipped, we are not trained to see state in this particular way. So how do we become part of a structure which we have been interrogating? And then that emphasis also came that the demand for 33% reservation never came from these kinds of social movements. In a way, by throwing that particular issue in front of the women's movement, the state, in a way, one argument that was made was the state, in a way, hijacked the agenda of social movements, and the women then went on discussing this particular issue of quota within quota, which never came, and my colleague is going to discuss that later in her presentation, so I'll not spend more time on that. But the point here is that the issues which were raised by the autonomous women's movement, which was of domestic violence, rape, custodial rape, definition of rape, later dowry, and couple of other issues which we get to see right from 70s and later in 80s were taken up by women's movement, or by the women from social movement, which could be about equal rights, which could be about redistribution of resources, which could be about development. Whatever issues that were taken up by these women from movements was in a way were marginalized, and what came to the center stage was the issue of 33% reservation. Was this something which the women from the movement had asked for, was a question. Of course, this kind of a question was asked way back in 90s, but what continued to, what we get to see continuing in the politics is that the women who were part of social movements didn't necessarily join the electoral politics, except for one or two very prominent names, the names like names like Neelam Gore, who recently left Uddhav Thackeray's Shiv Sena and joined the other Shiv Sena. So, and even prior to that, she had moved from a couple of other parties. But except for such names, we don't get to see that a woman coming from social movement has been part of the electoral politics. Which also tells us about the second point, which is there on my slide, is the social character of political parties. And here, which is very true in all Indian states, and since I'm talking about Maharashtra, in case of Maharashtra as well, what we get to see is that these political parties, and again, I'm not singling out any one particular political party, they are under the control of dominant caste. Dominant caste is a terminology which Dr. M. N. Srinivas came up with, which is a caste which is not necessarily at the apex of the caste hierarchy, but a landholding caste, and which also contributes to its political power. And there has been analysis done by certain scholars which has shown that for past 50 years, more than 85% of Maharashtra's cabinet came from the Maratha caste. So when we are talking about women from local level politics or women from social movement graduating to state level politics, one also needs to consider the fact that though at the local level we get to see that different kinds of reservations have been incorporated, quota within quota idea is addressed and considered. If the dominant caste politics is going to determine the issue of seat sharing, or post Mandal, if we get to see there is rise of OBC politics in almost all Indian states, including Maharashtra, then caste factor is also going to play a significant role in women actually getting the tickets to contest elections. What the data which I showed in a very first or second slide, where we get to see that large number of women actually contested election, but very few got elected. The ones who got elected were mostly came from political parties and also from political families. So if that is going to be the case, and if political parties are creating some kind of a door-keeping mechanism with only dominant caste women coming from political families getting the tickets to contest elections, then whatever may happen at the level of non-party democratic politics, at the level of social movement, to percolate power till there, or these women entering the corridors of power itself has certain limitations. The last point which I would make, and then I'll stop, is the very definition of politics. And that is a very significant factor which stops women or which prevents women despite very good work. And I'll give you two examples. One is of women and other one is of a social activist. There is a case study, many of you must have read that. There is this study done by Vishakha Datta. It's again on Maharashtra. The title of that report is And Who Will Make Chapatis? And the study is of these all women gram panchayats, which came even before the 33% reservation. And all these women gram panchayats were part of a movement called Shetkari Sangatna and its women wing called Lakshmi Mukti Andolan. Now, whatever good work that these women did in their respective gram sabhas was never seen as politics. The way people perceived what these women did for 5 years was that they were doing some social work but not politics. Despite the fact that these women were elected representatives and whatever work that they did through gram panchayats and using the state funding. So our definition of politics, what is our definition of politics? What is our definition of power? Is it something which gets defined on the basis of the amount of nuisance value that you have, or is it something which is associated with the good work that one does or the public work that one contributes to? Because if the good work is associated with social work and politics is not associated with that kind of public work, then despite doing good work, the women are going to face problems in getting re-elected or in graduating from local level to state level and state level to national level. So the very definition of politics, and again, as I said, this is one example that I mentioned about Lakshmi Mukti and the other example, and that's very old example, again associated with the city of Pune, where somebody called S.M. Joshi contested the very first election of 1952. And he didn't get the votes even from the unions that he had organized. He was incidental in organizing many unorganized sections, including the defense accounts. Whatever unions that he had organized and whatever membership of these unions, the number was there, but the number of votes that he got was less than the membership of the unions that he had organized. So even the union members, the people who were supporting him for protest activity or for their whatever professional interest, went ahead to vote for Congress, didn't vote for him. And the same case we again get to see in 2014 happening when again, I am very well aware about why the candidates of Aam Aadmi Party didn't get elected. There are a couple of other examples, but a simple case of Medha Patkar contesting from certain area in Mumbai where she actually had a support. She had worked for the slum dwellers of Mumbai from that area. Or women, a couple of other women whose name I've mentioned in the women, in another slide where I mentioned about the women from social movement. It could be Ulka Mahajan or Surekha Dalli, or people who have been part of social movement, who have represented the cause of certain section of people in the society, have fought for them, and their integrity is beyond doubt. But when it comes to electoral politics, the members of their organization or the section whom they are representing do not necessarily go and vote for these candidates. And that is a big problem, a problematic, I would say, that if good work is not going to cater, if your work in social movements is not going to help you to either get ticket or get elected, then we have to work not just at improving women's participation, the quality of women's participation in party politics or in electoral politics. We have to go still deeper and interrogate the very meaning of politics and power. And that, I think, is a big task before all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Redkar. You brought up some very interesting points indeed. The next panelist is Dr. Sonia Nagarale, and she's an associate professor at the Department of Law at the Pune University. And her PhD was on the use and misuse of parliamentary privileges in India. And she specializes in law, human rights, constitutional law, administrative law, media laws, and medical jurisprudence and forensic science criminal. And she has conducted workshops on human rights, education, and sexual harassment, and she has won several awards. Please, we look forward to hearing.
Very good morning to all of you. Today we'll be discussing about the women and youth participation in electoral politics. So we all know that the preamble of the Constitution of India, when it laid down the objective and the principles, one of it was democracy. And when we talk about democracy, we do talk about having a representative and inclusive democracy. And when we say inclusive democracy, even women's political participation is a part of it, because the very values and principles in the preamble also talk about equality. So we here talk about gender equality and no discrimination on the grounds of sex. That is what our part 3 of the Constitution, the fundamental rights, also lay down. So the very first slide which I took was of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, because he was the one who first raised or educated the women's questions. And he said that I measure the progress of the community by the degree of progress which women have achieved. So for him, he said that sorry for the bad throat. So for him, he said that the women's rights is about proper representation, and proper representation in the realm of education and politics. So he was the one who first advocated that there should be equal political rights which should be given to women at par or on par with the males as such. When we discuss about the journey of the political participation of the women, so I would like to bring into that it was All India Home Rule Mission that was in the year 1917, which spoke about equal voting rights for women, and that was led by Sarojini Naidu. And that was put forth and that was accepted at that point of time. Just not that, but there were certain leaders who were there, women leaders like Begum Shah Nawaz, who also submitted a memorandum to the British Prime Minister. And they did emphasize on to absolute equality of political status. But let me bring to your notice is that Sarojini Naidu was not about discussing about reservation at that point of time, because they did not found that women at that inferior level, but they felt that they are equal and meritorious to contest on their own and be a part of the polity of the country. Of course, the Constituent Assembly, which was formed, and then you would see that their representation was of 15 women members in that. So altogether, there were 389 members. And then you would see that 15 women members were representing. And there, the issue which came about was about the reservation for women. But then that was rejected by saying that it is not very much necessary, but rather it's unnecessary as such. 51 women candidates, they contested in the very first Lok Sabha, and they marked around 4.70% as representation. And today, we have 14.44 representation in the Lok Sabha as such. So somewhere the graph has grown with regard to the representation of the women. One very important landmark and a constitutional amendment which took place in 1992 was the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. And as per that, 33% or 1/3 would be reserved in the panchayats and in the municipalities. So it said that not less than 33%. The limit for reservation, or reservation should not exceed 50%. So many of the BJP states at that point of time, they took advantage of this provision and they gave away 50% reservation in the panchayats and municipalities by interpreting that the provision said that not less than 33%, but it could be then interpreted as being more than 33%, but the ceiling which has been put onto reservation is 50%. So many of the BJP states took advantage and gave away 50% reservation in their states, BJP ruled states at that point of time. So, as the next, I would like to go to the constitutional provisions. One extremely important provision by virtue of which we have political reservation is Article 15, Clause 3. Of course, Article 14, which talks about equality of laws. So there, it talks about gender equality. And when I talk about Article 15, Clause 3, it says that the state shall make special provision for women and children. And by virtue of this, there is political reservation that is under by 73rd and 74th Amendment, which came in 1992. Of course, there are other provisions, and this 73rd and 74th, where you would see Article 243 D Clause 3 and 243D Clause 4, 243T Clause 3 and 243T Clause 4. Article 324 to 329 deals with electioneering in India. So, Article 326 is also important because it discusses about voting, right to vote. The voting would be on basis of adult suffrage. So, these are very important articles which we all should be aware of, and it discusses about electioneering in India. Then we come down to the Women Reservation Bill, which came up in 2008. Of course, I'll be coming down to the chronology of it. Now, the Women Reservation Bill has been pending for almost 26 years now. And we want this reservation bill to come is because it is going to change the very character of the parliament. And you see that there was such a hostile resistance which came by opposing this bill, and that was over intersectionality, what they called it as. And this was 108th amendment bill which came up in 2008, and they discussed about 33% of reservation in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies for women. Now, herein, the seats were proposed to be reserved in rotation and would have been determined by drawing certain lots, and that seats would be reserved only once in 3 consecutive general elections. Just not that, but the bill shall be operational, or it shall be operational for 15 years. That is what it was said. Now, here in 33% reservation, now many of the political parties, especially RJD, JDU, and SP, they came up with saying that there should be reservation within reservation or quota within quota. So, within that 33% as well, which would be for women, reserved for women, there shall be reservation within that 33%. So, now this could not happen, and then it lapsed. So you see that reservation, a very important suggestion which came up when we discussed about in many of the workshops and all that reservation, it should be within the political party itself, so that this question would not come in that within quota and reservation within reservation. So one glaring example was about Uttar Pradesh, where Priyanka Gandhi, when she came up recently with the state legislative assembly elections, she said that ladki hoon, lad sakti hoon, and she promised to give away 40% tickets to females, and she did that. And then otherwise also 40% reservation in government jobs and so on and so forth. So you see that somewhere internal democracy of the party, where of the political party, they should start somewhere with having what you can call it as reservations, and then probably there would be more political participation of the women. This is a chronology which I have come up with. In 1974, there was a report which was submitted to the Ministry of Education and Social Welfare with regard to the status of women in India. 1996, when H.D. Deve Gowda was the Prime Minister, first time, the 81st Constitution Amendment Bill was introduced, but it could not be passed. It was referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee because of a lot of debates and deliberations could take place, and it was chaired by MP Geeta Mukherjee. She belonged to the CPI. 1998, it was reintroduced in the 12th Lok Sabha with the 84th Constitutional Amendment Bill. Again, it lapsed. 99, 2002, 2003. In 2010, there was an attempt wherein it was passed in Rajya Sabha. It could not be passed in Lok Sabha because Lok Sabha got dissolved. And this recent 2008. Now, there's a PIL. This matter is sub judice. Of course, I'll be discussing this with regard to reintroduction of Women Reservation Bill. And this matter is still sub judice in the Supreme Court, which I'll be coming soon. I have looked into certain arguments which are in favor, pros and cons of this bill. Sorry. The very first which you can see is in favor of the bill is that affirmative action is necessary. Because unless, what we can see is that when can there be more political participation of women in India? A very good example is of 73rd and 74th Amendment, which brought into 33%, now 50% in so many of states. So women have become very proactive at the rural level, even at the wherever there are municipal corporation, municipalities. But when it comes down to Lok Sabha or state legislative assemblies, so we need to have, it is imperative to have assertive action or reservations as such. Of course, it is going to better the condition of the women. It has been seen that when at the rural level and even at the municipal corporations, the women therein have been very efficiently working, and just not for women, but for overall its constituency. So you see that they can be better connected, they can look into gender sensitive areas. Gender budgeting is there, just not that, but they have very efficiently taken care of all the local concerns like water supply, electricity, everything has been, education, all these has been taken care. So, and there would be, of course, a very strong lobby in the parliament which would fight for the rights of the women. And we have seen that, as I have just mentioned about it. And different challenges shall be addressed, because Nirbhaya was one of the infamous thing which incident took place. And then after there were reforms which were brought into the law. So Criminal Amendment Act took place in 2013. So then it would eliminate certain structural barriers with regard to women. But many of them, they came up and saying and criticized the bill by saying that, oh, women, they cannot compete on the basis of merit, if at all they have been given reservation. So then what is the point to have women in, and when they say that we are equal, then where's that equality? So somewhere, it runs counter to the principle of equality. That was the criticism given. And it said that they would stay isolated, because women, they like men cannot have dinner diplomacy and cannot have that PR. So for them, they would be isolated from all the political arena as such. So here in reservations would also restrict the choices of voters to women candidates. And women would, probably destroy the very picture of ideal family, because women are meant to look after the family, take care of the children. So somewhere that ideal family structure shall be destroyed. Just not that, but unequal status of women would come, because upper caste women would be coming more into, because the caste system is very much still ingrained at many of the places in India. So somewhere the upper caste would be given more priority over the lower caste. Then the current statistics which I look into was that the Interparliamentary Union, what statistics has been given. So therein, I could see that many European countries are more progressed when it comes down to political participation. So there you can see that how in Maharashtra, the women representation is 8.33. So you see, and let me tell you that we are even behind Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So you would not believe that India ranks 148th when it comes down to women representation in polity. And in the list of 193 countries, we are 148th, and we are behind Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan as such. So you see that, and even in Maharashtra, when it comes down to women representation, we are just 8.33%. That's absolutely negligible. Many states, when I said that they have given 50%, so you can see the list of states and where they have given 50% reservation in panchayats and in municipalities. They have taken advantage of this, and many of the states could not. There are two very important case laws which I was saying sure. So, Government of Andhra Pradesh versus P.B. Vijay Kumar, this case came up on 12th May 1995, and the year the Supreme Court specifically and expressly mentioned that this one of the constitutionally recognized methods of overcoming the type of backwardness is by giving political reservation to the women, and that is by virtue of Article 15, Clause 3. Which I just spoke about, a fundamental right where the state gives away or special provision can be made for women and children. Now I just spoke about a case on National Federation of Indian Women and versus Union of India in 2022. This is a PIL which spoke about reintroduction of the reservation of bill for women, and that matter is still sub judice. There are certain obstacles of which comes with regard to the women participation. Of course, patriarchal mindset, social norms, and all. Women reservation not featured in national political discourse. In fact, in BJP's and Congress's manifesto, they had mentioned about giving reservation to women, but then it never came into reality. Then the impact of women in politics, you would see that what, the women at grassroots level has really helped other women express themselves in a better way. Corruption was reduced. That was also one very important thing. And nutrition outcome also was very good. Education, training, all these, you would see that these are advantages, if at all, political reservation given, and there is more of political participation of the women as such in the Indian polity. I looked into slightly participation of youth in politics, just to give a small passing reference. Swami Vivekananda spoke about that the youth would ensure a brighter future of the world. And there were certain challenges faced by the Indian youths in politics. We have seen dynastic politics and corruption and high funding required. So all such factors are there. Now, the National Youth Policy of 2022 also spoke about young women will be encouraged to participate in so many Gram Sabha meetings and electoral processes. Youth in Democracy and Governance is an initiative by G20 countries highlighting importance of empowering youths with the skills and knowledge which is necessary to participate effectively in governance and decision-making processes. In the conclusion, I would like to say that adequate representation of women in politics is going to fulfill the objective of the Constitution, that is of representative democracy. We are the biggest parliamentary democracy in the world, and one of its most resilient nations are we. And we would want to see proportion of women in the parliament to be increased, and that is where we are going to eradicate gender disparity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarale. Now I request Ms. Angelica Aribam, who is a political activist working on issues of gender, race, and democratization of politics. She's the founder of Fem First Foundation, an NGO that works to promote women's political leadership in India. And she was also named as one of Forbes India's 30 under 30 for her work on policy and politics. And she was also the National General Secretary of the National Students Union of India, which is the student wing of the Indian National Congress.
Thank you so much. Can you see me at the back, or should I go there? This usually happens because I'm not too tall. If you can, then I'll just proceed. Thank you so much, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to everyone on the dais as well. It was interesting hearing your perspectives. So I was thinking about how I should give this talk, given that I have only around 10 to 12 minutes. And I could talk about data, or I could talk about my lived experiences. And I decided to go with the later. So I started this nonprofit organization 4 years ago. We work to ensure that there is more political representation of women in Indian politics through capacity building, advocacy, and ensuring that there is a sisterhood of women political leaders. But let me take you back a little bit in my journey to understand why I started this organization. So the story of Fem First Foundation is intertwined with my personal story. I joined politics at the age of 20. I retired from politics at the age of 25. For you to understand what that actually means, I have to take you back a little further into my life journey as well. Is it echoing?
No, it's fine.
It's fine? Okay. So I come from a small town, a small village in the northeastern region of India called Manipur. And it is definitely in the news right now, and you must have seen pictures, etc., of the conflict that's ongoing right now. So Manipur is a state where women are predominantly in the resistance movement. You see them on the streets, fighting for justice, for various excesses of the state and others, right? So my mom, when I was a very young child at the age of 4 or 5, my mom used to take me back, on her back with a string of clothes and carry me around as she went and participated in the protests. So as a young child, I saw the value of the resistance movement. And what was, in fact, ironical that Manipur's movement was led by women on the streets, but as they go home, most of them were also victims of domestic violence. My home was no different. Every evening, the sound of, drunk husbands beating up their wives, it was like every evening you would hear them. There was no escaping it. My father would come back home drunk and beat up my mother for no reason whatsoever, right? And as a young child, I was around 7 years old when I decided to step up and raise my voice against the injustice that was happening to my mother. I remember that particular evening, I was wearing an orange-colored dress, and my father was angry with my mom, and he was beating her up. I could hear her crying and squealing, and at that moment, something stirred inside me, and I found courage within me. And I was wearing this orange-colored dress. I had a pencil and a notebook in my hand. I went up to them, and I said, "Will you please stop? I'm trying to study. I have an exam tomorrow." In that moment, my father it has never happened. He was shocked. He left. And in that particular moment, I looked at my mom, and she was happy that I stood up for her. And I realized that even though I am small, I have a powerful voice. It led me fast forward to a couple of years. I moved to New Delhi at the age of 12. I did my schooling there. As a woman, as a young girl from Northeast India, living in New Delhi where racism is so rampant, it was quite a challenge, trying to reconcile myself with the racial discrimination that was happening on the streets, in my classroom, everywhere I went. I was seen as a chinky, the Chinese, momo, whatever, those, slangs that throw at you. So I participated, I joined in the anti-racism movement very young in life, during my teenage years. And after realizing that after going through the motions for quite a few years, at the age of 20, I realized that I should join politics because it was the best way to change the status quo. I was elected in Delhi University, and this is one of the entry routes when you talk about politics is, number one is through student activism. Number two is social movements, and so one of the speakers already mentioned. Number three is dynasty politics, wherein it doesn't really matter whether you're a boy or a girl, you just have to carry the name forward of the family. And number four nowadays is going to the policy space, doing fellowships, etc., and getting into politics. For me, at that point in time, this was 2012, I joined politics through student politics at the Faculty of Law in New Delhi. I remember when I was trying to contest an election in the university, I used to be I'm still the same height. I haven't grown, unfortunately. But I was wearing this black t-shirt and jeans, going from classroom to classroom, asking people to vote for me. And one of my seniors pulled me to the side one evening, and he was like, "Angelica, do you really want to win this election?" And I was like, "Of course, yes." "Then this is not going to work for you." I was a little taken aback. I was like, "See, you need to dress like a politician. You need to wear white kurtas, only then the people will vote for you." This was a college election here we're talking about. But right there, the conditioning begins. You're supposed to act like you're different. You have to act like the conventional way the politicians dresses or carry themselves to be able to break into the mold, to get that foot into the door. As a young girl, I was 20, I listened to the advice given to me, thankfully. Also, that's because I believe in another policy, which is you cannot rebel against a system unless you get into it and try to change it. If before even you get a foot onto the door, if you rebel, no one's going to even open that door for you. So I joined, and I was elected Subsequently, I became the All India General Secretary of the Students' Wing of the Congress Party within months. Mr. Rahul Gandhi was very kind to do that to me. But as I traveled across India and interacted with students and both young boys and girls, I saw that young women were as interested to join politics as young boys. But when we look at the data will indicate the lesser number of women. That's because the retention rate of women in politics is extremely low. And what do I mean by this? The retention, they might join, girls in the second year, third year, they will join politics and they will work passionately, even more hardworking than some of the men. I hope no one will be offended by that. But by the time they graduate, they tend to leave the political system. And that is because politics is not a job that pays you. And women for centuries have had to depend on financial independence to be able to push back the patriarchal barriers that family imposes on them as well as society imposes on them. Unless you have financial independence, you can't shatter the glass seal. You can't shatter the shackles that bind you, right? So young girls tend to leave the system by the time they graduate, whereas the boys continue to be within the political system. But having said that, there is a lot of entry of young girls in the political system. And as I travel across the country, one of the other things that I noticed that every time I walk into a room for a political meeting of high-level officials, there will be a marginal number of women. In a room of, for example, 25 men, there will be 2 women, right? And I remember this one meeting which I chaired as a young, the very first meeting I chaired, I was shocked by the number of men and the lesser number of women. As we were discussing what were to be done during, during the forthcoming months for the political party, I saw that whenever the girls try to speak up, the men will often drown out their voices. Or they will not listen to what the girls were saying, they will just laugh at it as if they were not talking anything serious. And when the time for the lunch break came, it was assumed that it will be the girls in the room who are also office bearers, like vice president of the organization, general secretary of the organization. They expected to serve everyone else in the room. And one of the girls, when this happened, looked at me, with a knowing smile and just carried on with what she was supposed to do because she never even got a chance to speak. And later on in the course of the meeting, when the men, they would come up to me and be like, ma'am, let's do one thing. Let's not include the women in the upcoming programs. And I was like, why? I was like, ma'am, वो लड़कियाँ हैं ना, वो एक दूसरे से बनती नहीं है. They fight a lot. They can't work together. So the idea here is, women are often pitted against each other. They're made to feel that they have to compete amongst themselves. And they are sort of kept away from the working of things merely as ornamental, as token seeds. So in even television operas, etc., show a lot of औरत ही औरत की दुश्मन होती है, etc. It becomes so ingrained even in the mindset of the women. They think that they have to fight amongst themselves to get ahead. And one example. This is not just in India, to be honest. Whenever I speak in universities and conferences across the world with women leaders, one thing that often comes up is the idea that women fight amongst each other. But I want to demystify this. The reason that happens is because we have been conditioned to believe that women have to fight women to get ahead. Whereas patriarchy, it's patriarchy in a way. So what patriarchy has done is they have shown us there's a cake, there is a pie, and they have shown us only a piece of the pie. Like say 33% reservation women, just a piece of the pie, right? 2 or 3, 1 or 2 seats in a board committee of 10, 20 people. Like the 2 seats are for women and then everyone else for men. So that mindset has become so ingrained even in the minds of girls and young women that they feel that they have to fight only for the 33%, they have to fight only for the 1 or 2 seats without seeing the whole picture, and that becomes problematic. So what I tell young women and also men is, especially to the young women, that we need to look at the whole pie. we need to realize the fact that we can all have a piece of the pie. It's not reserved only for men. Nowhere in the Constitution, nowhere it says that it's only for the men, right? So we should try and bring more women onto the table, and take a larger piece of the pie rather than what patriarchy shows us. But unfortunately, this is something that we are just trying to, the idea of it is something that we're just trying to normalize through the organization that I run, along with other programs. So I have 1 minute, okay. So I have touched upon certain things early. One of the speakers, Dr. Nagarale, had mentioned about voluntary quota in party politics. And I have written extensively on this. When we talk about women's reservation, and there are 3 ways of affirmative action of women's reservation. Number 1 is fixed quota, wherein you have a fixed seat and it remains there. The rotational quota is number 2, which is what the Women's Reservation Bill in India is about, where you rotate seats. Number 3 is the voluntary quota in political parties. In my opinion, voluntary quotas in political parties don't work. And why do I say this? Is because if we look at data, we look at countries in Latin America, we look countries in Africa, etc., where they have implemented voluntary political quotas. But in those countries, the participation of women in politics has never gone beyond 20%. But in countries where they have brought in rotational quotas and fixed quotas, they have gone above 40%, 15%, in Rwanda 64%, Scandinavian countries, which is the true note of women's representation, more than 50%. In India, in the students' wing of the Congress party that I was a part of, we used to have voluntary political quotas, which meant that there were certain seats which were reserved for women only to contest elections and to be a part of it. But it did not really work because there are many challenges associated with contesting in an election, and more often than not, what happens is those seats are given just as a token, just to fill a gap, and we couldn't find women candidates. And similarly, when we talk about the larger context of a parliament or an assembly, it wouldn't really work because political parties will give women seats which are non-winnable. And when women contest against male candidate, they receive lesser funding. Studies have proved this. They receive lesser fundings. There is a lack of muscle power, money power, so to speak, in the language that we speak in political terms. And winnability becomes, just to ensure that they fill the quota, they give unwinnable seats to women. That doesn't really bring to the end goal of having the gender parity in the parliament or in the assembly, or even the 33%. So the surest way to go ahead is ensure the Women's Reservation Bill, which has unfortunately lapsed now, be brought back and implemented. That is the surest and the shortest, easiest, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now I call on our last speaker and the only gentleman among this group. This is Professor Sridhar Pabisetti. He is a Senior Director of the School of Government, MIT World Peace University in Pune. And he has also been the founding director of Kautilya School of Public Policy. He is also the Chief Enabler at Center of Inclusive Governance, a citizens collective for social actions on public problems. Professor Pabisetti has such a long CV that I think I will stop here. And Professor, you have 12 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back at the ADR conference. It was in the year 2008 and 2009. I had the fortune of being the state coordinator for the National Election Watch, and I've had the privilege of attending earlier conferences and gathering so much about what's happening in electoral reforms. And the idea of understanding politics up close and real from such critical perspectives helped me really kind of look into public policy and politics in a much more fresher eyes. And in the year 2009, I transitioned from my tech and consulting role into the larger journey of India's inclusive growth. And I'll try and bring some snippets from that journey and look at what are the big ideas that will pan out as we go forward in this youth and women representation. Starting with the first, the women representation, and as Dr. Kiran mentioned, I'm not just outnumbered in this panel, ma'am, also at home. My wife and daughter continuously test my persuasive skills of how do we get many of the resolutions at home passed. So it's important for us to acknowledge that it's a half the sky belong to women in the world, right? And I had a wonderful conversation about 15 years ago with Harvard economic historian David Landis. He was talking about the Eurocentric rise and fall of nations, what many countries did well, how did they grow sustainably longer period of time. At one point of time, I asked him, this is 2008, 2007, 2008. We had just had the India Shining program kind of just fall apart, and the party did not get elected. I was telling what's happening, how do people think, what do you think is happening? David Landis confessed, telling that he is no expert on India. But he said an interesting thing. He said, Sridhar, look at, if you are saying that it's a growth trajectory that matters to India, then what other countries did is important, but what some countries are not doing is also important. He said, look at the Middle East. They're endowed with so much natural resources, but they choose to keep half of their human resource behind, not part of the economic life, not part of the larger social life. So it's a self-goal that we are drawing, right? And for a guy who did computer science, who worked in the software company, this was a little weird, right? Because I have seen half of my class being with women, at least 40%, 30% of my workforce colleagues being women. This hadn't stricken me as much as when he said this, right? And then I started looking at saying that what is happening in women participation. If you start looking at the advantages where we are today, the 73rd, 74th Amendment has given us between 30 to 50% of women representation at the tier 3 governance. Why hasn't that bottom-up thing worked up, and why aren't there women in the MLA and MP elections? And it's very important that we look at it not just from a women-centric point of view, but also look at the political economic point of view. If you look at all the national leaders of the Indian freedom struggle, they all emerged as mayors of some city somewhere, be it Allahabad, be it somewhere else, right? The grassroots politics journey began there. But if you go back and look at how many corporators are today ending up getting an MLA ticket, or how many of them end up getting an MP ticket over a period of time, it's a very, very small trickle, right? And if you compare that number with women growing up in this journey, maybe it's comparable, but that's a matter of research for all of us academicians to go back and look at it. But as a practitioner and a professor of practice, my energy has always been looking at trying to engage with people who are interested in this, both women and youth. And we did in 2012, Professor Rajiv Gowda and myself at IIM Bangalore, we did an interesting program called India Women in Leadership. We got 26 women leaders from across the country who were in tier 2 and tier 3 of politics, and tried to take them on a 50-day journey of understanding the cutting edge of political leadership across the country as well as in Singapore, and try and see what are the conversations that are going on in the room when we put them with political leaders from across party lines. One of the conversations that came in 2012, 2011 was where the women reservation was being debated very, very heavily. And one of the political leaders from UP said that, sir, are you expecting that we will sign our own death warrant? If you say 33% of the seats have to be given up, whose seat will it be that we are putting at the sacrificial block, right? So there were those debates and those mindsets that were there, and we all know the larger politics, why the bill did not come through. So we need to kind of go back and start battling it from the trenches, right? Go back and look at this whole simple thing of 33 to 50% reservation is there in the third tier of government. Why isn't that bringing up to the tier 2? That natural phenomenon has to be strengthened, right? And if we can really work on that, then there is a way of us changing it, right? And I'm glad that we have political party representatives here. And one of the things that I would urge all of you is to kind of latch onto it. Go back and say, internally we have to promote X number of seats to come from people who are from the grassroots movements, right? A counter trend to this is also that the sons and daughters of existing politicians directly get into an MLA ticket or an MP ticket. There is no jostling of these Neta Putras and Neta Putris to get into the third tier of the government, which means that the third tier of government is just there for the name's sake, right? At least the rural governance has improved, but the urban governance has not improved much, right? So these structural things are holding us back. So we should go back and stop celebrating the 50% reservation or 33% reservation that we have got and say that's not enough. The movement and the struggles are still on. I'd like to request you to go to the next slide. The other natural phenomenon that's happening, and this is just a small slide to illustrate what was said earlier yesterday, of the youth who is going to dominate the Indian demographic dividend, right? And this is going to last for the next 20 years, this kind of the shape of the curve. If you look at the ages on the left and the percentage of people representing this, right? And I go back to half the sky. How long will you keep half the sky being underrepresented, right? And Ajit, I think, mentioned yesterday, Dr. Ajit Ranade, that if you're not there on the menu, then obviously you will not get picked up, right? And in one of my weaker moments, I had a conversation with Dr. Jaiprakash Narayan, a fabulous conversation in Bangalore one evening. And he said the best and the brightest should be in politics, and that's how politics has changed for the better. And that's when I decided to contest the elections the MLA elections in Hebbal constituency in 2013. The elections opened up my mind in a very, very different way, right? It's about, you should first be on the menu and you should be visible on the menu. You should go back and talk to each and every constituent saying that there is a better alternative, right? And many people say, youth, they are not taken seriously. It's not true. I mean, my whole election campaign, though I did not win, I'm very happy that the amount of respect I had from across the constituents, and which also resulted in respectable number of votes, is that it's an argument. If you can capture them in imagination, then surely the electorate will respond, right? And I think this is very important. The youth have a large voice. I was pretty young then, and I was very well respected, and I don't see the age argument is very important, right? Just go to the next one, right? Just contrast this with what is the reality today, right? That's a representation in the Indian Parliament, the recent Lok Sabha, right? The 2019 election, right? How can we live with this kind of a divergence, right? And the last time a divergence like this happened in UK was when, I've heard from various political experts and also policy leaders and ambassadors, etc. Nobody thought Brexit would happen, right? Because everybody said, the kind of argument that people are all putting about the change is that it's not relevant, the youth will think differently and they will vote differently. But what got surprised is that the Brexit results was by people who were of older age who ended up voting and overpowering the argument, right? So this graph is important for us to understand that a whole lot of India is underrepresented, is not represented well in the decision-making process. Are they not interested? My own journey in the last 15 years of being in the civil society, politics, and public policy space tells the contrary. The youth are very much interested. They are not just turn up in large numbers, as you can see here as well, that the number of youth are high. The number of women is almost 50%. I did a rough count, right? That how do you translate this into political representation and public policy representation? And that's where, as I have built many educational programs and institutions over the last few years, I've seen there's a tremendous interest. They don't know how to get into it. And even if they get into it, as Angelica rightly mentioned, the turnover is very fast and they just burn out very soon. So my urge for all of you is to start celebrating the right positives. What are the right positives? I think the first thing is an important graph that came up in the ADR report that got released yesterday is a page 21, which talks about the states where the number of women are in the assembly, right? So when we are all used to this top 3, top 5 lists that come in terms of GDP and other things, right? So here, it's not just that, Chhattisgarh is leading with 18% women representatives, right? And we also have Tripura, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, and West Bengal at 14% women representatives, right? How often are we sharing this positive narrative telling that something interesting is happening in these states, right? If at least all of us here go back with this positive building narrative telling that, these are the states to look out for, and look out for what will happen on important issues of maternal health, infant mortality, education, jobs, in these states, right? Are we going to see larger trends of better outcomes that are coming up, as my earlier speakers mentioned, right? I think mapping this and building narratives around these is very important, right? And secondly, also talk about how often have you gone to understand what's happening in countries like Rwanda, Cuba, and others where we have more than 50% women becoming MLAs, right? Our representatives. So that kind of narrative, the top 3 and the top 5 for us should change, and that narrative building is very important for us, right? And we also very lazy nation when it comes to governance and our processes, right? While we stipulate that the voting age is 18 years, we keep away them from becoming representatives till 25 years when it comes to MLA, and it's about 30 years when it comes to Rajya Sabha. Now let's go back and look at what did UK do. You can become a member of the House of Commons if you are 18. Yeah, thank you, right? And it's not just UK, right? Canada has done it. And just give me a second. I will just... Australia has done it, Germany has done it, and even France has done it, right? Now, why are we just stuck up by saying that you are wise enough to vote, but you are not wise enough to be voted in, right? And I think narratives like this can get built up, and once there is enough narratives, political parties will be forced to follow suit, and we will have weaker moments like what BJP did with 50% reservation at the third tier of government. And these kind of impulsive leadership movements are also something we should push for being sustained. When Priyanka Gandhi got 40% of reservation for women's seats in UP. Similarly, BJP did a very interesting experiment by giving a vast number of seats to really non-core politicians in the recent Karnataka elections, right? So there are these weaker movements where politicians also try to play the unconventional game. And I think we should kind of start pushing them and see the benefits out of those things to happen. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor. We were supposed to have about, almost half an hour of questions and answers, but we don't have time now. But we can take maybe 1 or 2 questions. So, any questions?
संजय पासवान, पूर्व केंद्रीय मंत्री, बिहार में एमएलसी हूँ। कल से यहाँ पर हूँ। एक तो लोहिया जी ने कहा था एक बात, लोहिया जी ग्रेट सोशलिस्ट लीडर, कि हिंदुस्तान की महिलाओं की आइडियल सती सावित्री के बजाय अगर द्रौपदी होती अगर, तो बात कुछ और होता। ये बहुत लोगों ने उसको इग्नोर किया। मुझे लगता है जो नैरेटिव्स पास्ट से लिया गया है, हम लोग के यहाँ जो फेमिनिज्म है वो बिल्कुल वेस्टर्न लेड है। लेड नहीं मैं कहूँ, वेस्टर्न लोडेड है। थोड़ा अपने इंडियन टेक्स्ट से भी देखना चाहिए हम लोग को। चाहे सीता का कैरेक्टर हो, चाहे द्रौपदी का कैरेक्टर हो, माइथोलॉजिकली सही, लेकिन उसको देखना चाहिए, स्टडी करना चाहिए, उस दृष्टिकोण से ही करना चाहिए। दूसरी बात मैं कहूँगा ये कि आज मेल विक्टिम्स हो रहा है बहुत जगहों पे। हर घर की महिलाएं ये फेस करती होंगी, डॉरी केस में महिला और पुरुष दोनों ही जेल में हैं ज़्यादातर। पॉस्को केस में जो भी मेल जा रहा है जेल में, सफ़र महिलाएं कर रही है। कभी कोई महिला ग्रुप्स ने, कलेक्टिव्स ने कभी पुरुषों के इस दुख को कभी उठाया नहीं है। मुझे लगता है कि जरा आप लोग इस पे विचार करें अगर, और जो महिलाएं उठाएंगी उसको पुरुष का वोट मिलेगा, समर्थन मिलेगा, सहयोग मिलेगा, सब कुछ मिलेगा। इसलिए मुझे लगता है थोड़ा इस पे एक इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव में देखना चाहिए। आज बूढ़े पुरुष परेशान हैं अपने पुतों से, डॉटर इन लॉ से, पति परेशान थोड़ा बहुत पत्नियों से है, तो थोड़ा इसको देखना होगा इस रूप में भी। इसको बिल्कुल लाइटली ना लें आप सब लोग। इसलिए मुझे लगता है कि क्यों ये आगे नहीं बढ़ पा रहा है चीज़ों को। आज एम्प्लॉयर, नो एम्प्लॉयर वांट्स टू हैव द लेडीज एम्प्लॉय। ये परेशानी है। ये लेडीज के सामने में प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है एम्प्लॉयमेंट का, कि कब वो कौन सा केस खड़ा कर दे हम लोग को। थोड़ा यह भी एक ऑटो लर्निंग हो या उनका एक डिस्कोर्स चले, मुझे लगता है ये करना चाहिए, तब जाकर के ये होगा। और हमारा कल था क्रिमिनलिटी पे था। अगर महिलाएं 50% से ज़्यादा भागीदार हो जाएंगी तो क्रिमिनलिटी ऐसे ही कम हो जाएगा पॉलिटिक्स का, मैं मानता हूँ। दूसरा है जिस पे लोग एग्री नहीं करेंगे, दूसरा मेरा सलाह है जो मैंने कल कहने से बड़ा हिचक गया था, आज मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि जिस दिन अपर कास्ट का भागीदारी कम हो जाएगा पॉलिटिक्स में, अपर कास्ट में कह रहा हूँ, अपर क्लास नहीं कह रहा हूँ, भागीदारी कम होगा, उस दिन देश का सब कुछ ठीक ठाक हो जाएगा।
Mr. Politician, please do not teach us whether we should be like Draupadi or Sita. If you are so interested in Indian tradition, kindly ask all your ministers, including our Chief Minister and our Prime Minister, to do the fourth stage of ancient Indian living, which is going to the jungles after the age of 50. Then you teach children. Us.
I have a question for Dr. Chaitra Redkar. Thank you for your presentation. My question is that how can we integrate the social and the political and ensure that not just women but we have more we have representation from all various genders in the parliaments or the legislative assembly?
I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer your question in 1 or 2 minutes that I have with me. But there are large number of questions, including something which our Sanjay ji, Paswan ji has brought up. Right from the basic issues that women are facing, लोहिया जी का जिक्र हुआ तो मैं रोक नहीं पा रही हूँ खुद को कि लोहिया जी ने एक बात कही थी कि भारत की औरतों को बिना धुएं का चूल्हा, बंद दरवाजे वाला पाखाना और नलके में पानी, ये 3 चीजें दे दो, वो अपनी मुक्ति खुद कर लेगी। तो ये जो बेसिक चीजें हैं वहां से लेके देयर आर सो मेनी इश्यूज। दूसरी बात, कहीं पे मैं थोड़ी सी असहमत हूँ कि ऐसे नहीं है कि सिर्फ औरतों को राजनीति में लाने से राजनीति का शुद्धिकरण हो जाएगा, क्योंकि ऐसी बात नहीं है कि औरतें भ्रष्ट नहीं हैं। वो उस मामले में भी मर्दों से कंधे से कंधा मिला के भ्रष्ट हो जाती हैं। तो भ्रष्टता जो है वो कहीं पे सत्ता का एक कैरेक्टर है, एक तो इसलिए समथिंग विच आई मेंशन्ड इन माय प्रेजेंटेशन इन वेरी ब्रीफ वे कि कहीं पे राजनीति किस लिए, उसका भी कहीं पे डिस्कशन होना चाहिए। दूसरा, रिप्रेजेंटेशन का मतलब इट्स अ वेरी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड थिंग। मतलब ऑन द वन हैंड वी आर सेइंग दैट वी वांट women to represent themselves, but by representing themselves, do they necessarily represent the gender sensitivity? मतलब वहां जाके औरतें या कोई भी, और ये हर उस तबके को भी लागू होता है कि भले मार्जिनलाइज कम्युनिटीज हैं, ऑप्रेस्ड कम्युनिटीज हैं, कास्ट के हिसाब से, कि क्या आप वहां जाने के बाद कौन सी विचारधारा, कौन सी सोच को रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं। तो ये इट्स अ ड्यूअल काइंड ऑफ अ थिंग कि वी वांट द पीपल फ्रॉम द सेम सेक्शन टू गो देयर, बट वी आल्सो वांट that their interests, their thinking to get represented when they go there. So that's the reason, as I said, there are multiple things will have to be done simultaneously, and that's also the reason, as I said, I won't be answering your question in just 1 minute.
I have a question for all of them. That is, if instead of reserving the seats in the why can't the political parties put up 1/3 women candidates? And I'm sure the women candidates, if in the party itself is reserved, then they are more empowered to stand for election and win against the men, and that is more empowerment rather than. And I'm sure if that is done, there will be much more than the one-third the son is in this parliament.
Again, something which I passingly mentioned in my presentation, if we analyze the social character of political parties, in all the states, there is something which we call as dominant caste, which is not necessarily at the apex of the caste hierarchy, somewhere over middle. It's a landholding caste, and they have majority of seats in whether it's in the legislative assemblies or in Lok Sabha. Also, what we get to see that after the recommendation of Mandal commissions have been recommended, and when there is a rise of OBC politics, we do get to see some kind of churning taking place, and OBCs playing one major role. But what we have to accept is that all the political parties, if we analyze the social character, there is dominant classes and dominant castes and dominant gender who enjoys the power. So somewhere we need to talk about changing the social character of political parties. Just imagine a situation, had there been no reservation for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, do you think, or do we think that still the political parties would have been open and would have been accepting and giving sufficient representation to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes? It's because of reservation that it's mandatory on political parties to be accommodative, to be open to certain sections. Unless and until there is a reservation, these sections don't get entry into politics. The same is applicable in case of women, though, and it's a irony that two major parties in politics support women's reservation bill, and despite that, the bill doesn't get passed in the parliament, despite the fact that the number of tickets that are given to women candidates are much lower than 33%. So it's only when there is something which is made mandatory, then what we get to see is some kind of the social fabric of politics is likely to change.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree with what Dr. Redkar has said entirely, sir. And to add a little bit to the answer, voluntary political quotas, what happens is when you impose it, political parties will, they do surveys of, areas which they might win, they might not win before they do party ticket distribution. I'm talking about it from an internal party perspective. So what happens is when you see seats which you feel that your party might not win those seats, and if there is a voluntary quota system, they might give those tickets to women just to say कि हमने महिलाओं को ticket दिया है. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of the speakers have mentioned Priyanka Gandhi. In the UP elections, लड़की हूँ, लड़ सकती हूँ, 40% tickets for women. When UP goes to election, 4 other states also go to election, which is Manipur, my state, Goa, Punjab, and Uttarakhand. In the same time when Priyanka Gandhi was announcing 40% for women in Uttar Pradesh, the Congress party, which she belongs to, was giving less than 10% tickets to women in those other states. So what happens here is when you know that you might not get that and you are willing to take the risk, you put women forward. It's actually, there's a term for this, we call it the glass cliff. It's glass cliff, the terminology means that women are put in such positions when they know that they will lose, but they're just put forward so that they take the fall for it. So that is another thing that happens within political parties.
Just one comment, yeah. Basically, just to add on, because I also referred in my presentation with regard to Priyanka Gandhi and then a suggestion wherein there should be internal democracy and of course some should be reserved for women, some percentage, the political party. But the effort by only one political party doing so is not going to bring into women representation. So all the major political parties has to have that internal quota, what we call it as, and then that would bring into some womenization in governance as such. So that is one thing what I feel is all political parties contribute, And what Paswanji said, that ancient India should be so. From in Rig Veda, but there was political participation by women, and they used to be participating in all the sabhas therein. So you see that later on that it went on to deteriorating the women's status, and that is how there was no representation. So we also look into the ancient India, but herein we referred from the pre-freedom era and then post-independence era. Yeah, thank you so much.
Just one comment on the women in the corporate world, right? I think one of the things that I'll speak from the IT sector because I've seen that up close. The IT sector is actually championing more and more women being in the workforce, continuing in the workforce, because they know that over a period of time, the women also drop off from the workforce after 5-10 years of their career, and they understand that it's very valuable to bring them back, right? And I think the diversity inclusion is an ongoing battle, and I think the laws that are made for women protection should also be very sensitive of the required supporting structures other than just the laws being put on by themselves, right? While you put maternity, forced maternity leave, but you should also kind of sensitize and bring support structure beyond that, and only then you will have the right result out of it.
Okay, I think we've really overstayed, and so we will call this to an end. And thank you very much to my panelists, and thank you very much to the audience as well.